Perfect. Let's get started. This talk is called Psychedelics for Entrepreneurs: How to Lead with Calm, Clarity, and Courage. It all begins with an idea, a moment of inspiration. This idea then germinates into a company. We scale this idea and encode it into values that get encoded into culture. But over time, it can seem almost part of the flow that the idea itself and the business ends up losing track of the human at the center. As entrepreneurs, we can sacrifice our health, our relationships, our joyfulness in service of building companies. Some common issues that entrepreneurs face are a lack of inspiration, burnout, failing relationships, anxiety and stress, and even not knowing how to relax, being on vacation on the beach and still checking emails. This talk is about how entrepreneurs can leverage the power of the healing journey and psychedelics in that context to discover happiness versus joy, self-empowerment, inspiration, psychedelics as an accelerant. I'll address the benefits and challenges that many entrepreneurs face, avoiding some traps that entrepreneurs have that are somewhat unique to them, and how to translate this work inside out to inspiring teams. Hi, my name is Austin Mao. I'm an entrepreneur myself. Over the past 13 years, I've been a tech and real estate entrepreneur, and most recently, the founder of Ceremonia, a nonprofit entheogenic church based in Colorado, where we guide entrepreneurs and any human along their inner journey to spirituality and mental health. I've worked with about 300 plus entrepreneurs over the past 3 years, working with plant medicines such as ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, and a variety of other synthetics. And I've worked with entrepreneurs ranging from new startup founders to billionaires, from Fortune 500 executives to consultants. And I've had the honor of being able to witness some of the common traits that entrepreneurs face. Having been one myself and continuing to follow that entrepreneurial journey myself, I've had the ability to speak the same vocabulary and empathize with some of the challenges that entrepreneurs have faced. One of the seminal works that I'm guided by is a book called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. The Second Mountain is a metaphor. In life, David Brooks, who's a New York Times columnist, writes that we climb this first mountain built on prestige and accolades, accumulation of wealth. And some of us sit atop this first mountain, and yet we don't feel a level of joy that we know is possible. Sometimes we might meet a scuba diving instructor on a beach in Thailand, or someone working for a nonprofit that's mission driven, and discover that they, despite maybe not even having the levels of accolades or wealth that we may have accumulated, are embodying a level of joy that we crave. And so David Brooks goes into this concept of happiness versus joy. Happiness being a fleeting moment. Maybe it's celebrating an award or having an accomplishment or raising a new round of funding. Whereas joy is something deeper, more pervasive, something that we can really feel in our bones. And Brooks goes on to say that joy is built on 4 escalating levels. The first level is physical joy. Think of a runner's high, or how you might feel working out or playing your favorite sport. The second is group effervescence. This is something that can be experienced in dance, at weddings, in men's groups, working with a community of friends where we can share in deeper connection with each other. The third is spiritual joy, which is a connection with a higher power, or can also be viewed as connection with our higher selves, deeper communion with something bigger than us. Sometimes this can happen in nature, and sometimes this can happen through religion. But the fourth and most powerful level of joy that David Brooks shares, he calls moral joy. Moral joy is defined by the commitment to a set of moral principles. In psychology, we can call this organizing principles. These moral principles can look like something like feeding the hungry, or can look like social justice, or it could even look like how to make communications with teams more efficient. The value itself is not what is important. It's the commitment to the value, because it creates a self-perpetuating feedback loop that the more that I value this commitment, the more I commit to it, the more I act on it, and the better I feel about committing to it, leading to a circular loop of joy. Brooks says that this is how life gets meaning and purpose. And this level of moral joy is built on 4 commitments. The commitments are to spouse and family, to vocation, which is what we're doing with our time, to a philosophy or faith, and then to community. In other words, the way to lead a purposeful, meaningful, and joyful life is through these commitments. Now, how does this relate to the entrepreneurial journey? The way that I like to look at the journey of life is to move from having things to doing things to being somebody, right? Climbing the first mountain often looks like being goal-oriented to having more material wealth, security, prestige, status, relationships. Then, as we start accumulating these things, we start to participate in the joy of actually doing things, meaningful work, service, deeply connecting, a commitment to teams. Ultimately, in the act of doing things, we can recognize that the reason why we do things is actually to feel something. For example, the reason why you buy a car or buy a home is not for the car or the home itself. It's for the feeling that you are seeking when you open that car and smell the new car smell, or the feeling of safety and hominess that you might feel in the new home. It's the feeling that we're actually chasing after. And so that's where we get to see that the state of being is really the end point of what life is all about. Being peaceful, harmonious, feeling safe and loved. In work, I like to mirror this have, do, be scale to how, what, why. When I've worked with entrepreneurs and they've described burnout, it's usually because that initial spark of inspiration has faded, and now their lives are dedicated to how to do something: problem solving, implementation, efficiency hacking, scaling. At some point, when the work was more interesting, maybe they were focused on what they were doing, the idea, the concept, team building, instilling cultural values. But at the very genesis of that inspiration, it was why we are doing something, the feeling, the mission, the core values, the ultimate act of service that we're seeking to aim towards. And so Whereas we might begin as entrepreneurs with the why and then start working towards the what, it's getting stuck in the how that we end up losing the thirst, the taste, and that original drive that motivated us from the very get-go. Psychedelics is one of the most exciting developments in mental health. The FDA currently has MDMA and psilocybin fast-tracked, calling them landmark drugs, with MDMA likely to be legalized by the end of 2023 or 2024, and psilocybin following suit in 2024 or 2025. In addition, ketamine, which is another dissociative psychedelic, was legalized in 2019. Oftentimes, psychedelics is described as being to provide 10 years of therapy in 10 hours. I can attest to this because my first time sitting with a very powerful psychedelic called ayahuasca in a ceremonial / psychedelic therapy container, I was able to receive an amount of healing that I could only imagine would have been possible with a dedication of weekly or bi-weekly therapy for 10 years. I was able to revisit original traumas that allowed me to access memory that I had repressed, access emotions that I've suppressed. And for the past 3 years, I've been leveraging this incredibly powerful tool for deeper connection with myself and deeper connection outwards. I believe that all of life is aimed towards safety. Life seeks to create life. It's the very foundation of evolution. There's a psychologist named Plutchik that created this really beautiful, colorful, emotional wheel that's often used in basic emotional psychology courses. And he charts out the primary emotions of happiness, sadness, surprise, disgust, anger, and then secondary emotions. And on this chart, it says that love is equal to safety plus joy. Consider this for a moment, that we can only feel this incredible feeling of love, which is the very basis of inspiration, when we feel joyful and when we feel safe. A study that put children in a playground that was fenced off had the children were able to just play freely in this playground. But when the fence was removed, the children huddled in the center. Curious. It's as if the borders that held the children created a feeling of safety, which allowed the state of being of freedom. So if we hold as true that life is aimed towards safety, that means that everything that we do in life, that our teams do in the workplace, is also aimed towards safety. Inner safety, which is the feeling of being safe with our emotions, with our ideas, with the power to create, comes from self-trust. It's self-reinforcing with trust. How much we can trust our intuition, how much we can trust our inspiration. And self-trust comes from self-love, which is this powerful force within ourselves of deep connection, of really feeling our feelings. In psychology, one of the frameworks that we facilitate in Ceremonia and is often considered one of the top psychological frameworks that pairs best with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy is called internal family systems. In internal family systems, there is this concept of parts theory, that our psyche, our ego, is built up of many, many, many different parts, maybe 100 different parts, a part that might feel angry, a part that might feel guilty, a part that might feel grief, a part that might feel surprise, a part that might feel resentment, and parts that might feel joy or love or caretaking, etc. And the role of all of these parts is to keep us safe, right? For example, a part that might feel pride can keep us safe because, for me personally, when I've really embodied pride, it's because I've been afraid to let people inside my vulnerability. I've put up walls, right? And in IFS, it says that when these protectors feel safe, that we have access to our self, our higher self with a capital S, and has this concept of self-led leadership. You might have experienced in your life a time where you said, I feel like I'm going crazy. And in IFS, the explanation for this would be all of these various parts blending together and interacting with each other in a way that doesn't feel congruent. But imagine the times where you felt great clarity, great calm, great inspiration. In IFS, that framework would say those are times where your parts felt safe to allow your higher self to fully express itself. Now, this is actually modeled in neuroscience and with psychedelics under a concept that was recently charted out called the default mode network. These are two areas of the brain that are kind of like the patterning or programming centers of the brain, right? The DMN might say, take a learned pattern as a child, such as don't touch this hot pan because you'll get burned, and get that encoded into those two parts of the brain. But it might create more complex algorithms of the brain that says, don't give your heart fully to this romantic interest because they might abandon you just like your mom or dad did, right? Now, the science of psychedelics shows that when the Imperial College of London Center for Psychedelic Studies, which is one of the leading institutions in the world, put advanced meditators who have done more than 30,000 hours of meditation, those on psychedelics and specifically on LSD, and children through fMRI scans looking at the default mode network, they discovered a common trait, that the default mode network was temporarily quieted. The activity was paused. In other words, the protectors, these safety mechanisms that live in the programming of the default mode network, were temporarily quieted. That is to say that the feeling of safety is fundamental to the creative powers, to the quieting of the mind, that is an objective of meditation, right? To produce to allow for the creative spirit of one's higher self. This is a bridge between psychology and spirituality. Similarly, in the psychedelic experience, safety is known as the primary determinant of efficacy and harm reduction when working with psychedelic-assisted therapy. So you may have, for those of you that have read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, he shares that set and setting are the two critical criteria for determining the efficacy of psychedelic-assisted therapy, right? And that's mindset, which is how we are currently thinking and how we're currently feeling, and setting, which is the environment that we're currently in. In other words, the mindset is representative of this feeling of inner safety, how safe we feel with the emotions that we have and with whatever might arise within the psychedelic experience. And then setting being the feeling of outer safety, external safety, which is the environment that we're in, right? The healing journey allows us to experience calm, clarity, and courage. And that's because the healing journey allows us to feel greater safety within ourselves. When we feel that internal sense of safety, then the entire world could be bearing down on us, but we're able to stand in the eye of the hurricane, strong. Inner safety is the goal of psychedelic assisted therapy. To that end, there are some really beneficial entrepreneurial traits. Having worked with so many entrepreneurs and being one myself, some of these could include the propensity for risk taking, right? Even the very nature of signing up and raising your hand and saying, yes, I'm going to try this revolutionary medicine is a form of risk taking. The second is curiosity, right? Entrepreneurs tend to have this knack for being deeply curious about their experience, which then leads into the third trait, problem solving. Entrepreneurs that I've worked with tend to have a very deductive pattern of seeking deeper and deeper answers to how they can optimize their mental health. And then the fourth trait is support seeking. Entrepreneurs tend to be able to seek out help, to tap into networks, to find the right professionals, to find the right experts in their workplace, but also when they're engaging in their inner journey, and particularly with something as powerful as psychedelic assisted therapy, they're able to often seek out the right people to support them on their journey. But these same beneficial entrepreneurial traits can also pose some challenges. Entrepreneurs tend to be high achievers, and that high achieving tendency can also lead them to be lone wolves. So while they can be good at seeking support, and many entrepreneurs are really good at finding people to help them in a hierarchical structure, oftentimes the most supportive mechanisms in working with this very rapid and accelerated healing modality is to find support from people at the same level. That is to say, the same level of humanness, no matter what anybody's status is or their qualities or traits. Working with other entrepreneurs, I've also recognized that there tends to be a perception of strength as stoicism versus weakness as vulnerability. Whereas much of the healing journey can be defined by how comfortable we become with vulnerability, how comfortable we are exposing our neck and knowing that it's actually the inner feeling of safety that self-perpetuates the healing opportunities that we have. Entrepreneurs tend not to be so great with uncertainty, which is a necessary component for this idea of surrender and letting go. So one of the foundational works that informs what we do at Ceremonia is David Hawkins, who's a neuroscientist turned spiritual teacher. And he wrote a phenomenal book that we ask all of our participants to read called Letting Go. Now, in letting go, and in many of the spiritual traditions, this concept of surrendering expectations and surrendering to the present moment, aka to be fully present, is one of the core necessities for allowing for resistance or allowing for challenging emotions to surface and allowing them to just be without judging them or attempting to suppress them. And sometimes with this desire for control that many entrepreneurs show up with, that could adversely affect the inner journey, or I should say, make it a little more challenging, another hurdle to overcome. And so many of the entrepreneurs that come through the door for psychedelic assisted therapy or for ceremonial work, one of the first barriers to push that we get to work with is that of allowing for the loss of control. Next, another challenging entrepreneurial trait is the pride or the ego as a safety mechanism. So this is something that's been really alive for me. And I would say that in my own inner and spiritual journey, pridefulness has been my greatest shadow. Pride is a particularly challenging barrier because the pride itself has blocked me from seeing the pride because I'm better than this. I know it all. I can handle this. And not and that safety mechanism, that protector within me, that part of me, um, inhibited me from seeing just how much I've blocked myself from feeling my feelings, from creating a relationship with uncertainty, with helplessness, with the lack of safety, which are fundamental necessities to heal the need for control, for living in the future, for having a relationship with my fear and anger, which are valid emotions. And finally, the the last challenging entrepreneurial trait that I'll share is this propensity to live in the future. What often makes us good entrepreneurs is our ability to predict and forecast into the future. And this predictive power, this forecasting ability, is what often actually prevents us from being in the present. Because in the future are all of these expectations, all of these uncertainties that we then try to control for in what we plot out, in what we build, in the risk management. But life is inherently unpredictable. Even if the structures out there can be predicted, we can construct, software, teams, practices, flowcharts to attempt to model what might happen. One thing that is definitely unpredictable is how we feel, how others might feel, because it's really our expectations versus the reality that's finally delivered that determines how we feel. With both the benefits of being an entrepreneur and working with psychedelic assisted therapy and the challenges, there comes certain traps. So I've spent a few years being in service to an ayahuasca organization that would bring entrepreneurs to Costa Rica or the jungles of Mexico and sit with plant medicine over a 7-day retreat. And we would sit together, 50 people at a time, with incredible human beings and share in deep vulnerability, deep love, deep healing together. Now, what I would see time and time again is that everyone would depart with great commitments and great smiles. But then, 1 week in the jungle, going back to modern life in the city, the inertia of all the patterns, all the structures that they've created their whole lives from an internal need for safety, that inertia can hit us like a freight train, right? In other words, imagine 10 years of therapy being compressed into 10 hours, experiencing that in a week in a retreat that is in the middle of nowhere, and then coming back to your relationship, your workplace, your calendar, the demands of all the bills. And it's very easy to allow that inertia to sweep you back into the old patterns. Because entrepreneurs tend to have more complex lives, because they tend to have a web that connects more people and has more responsibility in it, that inertia can be extra challenging. And so integration, which is a word that you'll hear so much in psychedelic assisted therapy, is, in my opinion, by far the most important aspect of doing this work. Because we can have great revelation in that 10 hours of therapy, compressing 10 years of doing the work. But if we can't bring that revelation back into our normal lives, then all the feelings, all the opportunities and revelations that have been surfaced can actually increase the amount of guilt that we might feel. Because we might say, oh, I know that I can be different, and yet I'm not. And that guilt can further suppress emotions. The second trap that entrepreneurs often face is that of slowing down or pausing. And this, of course, has to do with the inertia of all the work demands from the past, right? One of the concepts that I like to facilitate is this image of a monk, right? You'll notice that if you observe a monk, they're walking really slowly. When they eat food, they're taking every bite really slowly. You may have heard before that pausing your mind, pausing in general, is a key component of meditation. It's a key component of bringing clarity into your being. But there's no such thing as stillness, right? Even at a physical level, atoms are moving, molecules are combining, cells are going through your bloodstream. Stillness is a spectrum. And the more that we can slow down, the closer that we can get to that quietness, that pausing. But for entrepreneurs, that can tend to be a really challenging concept to work with because there are so many text messages, so many Slack messages, so many tasks to do that the pausing itself or the slowing down itself can feel very foreign. So one of the traps of being an entrepreneur and working with this space is the difficulty in slowing down, but it's also one of the opportunities. And the final trap that I'd like to speak on is that of future versus presence. This idea of surrender. So usually when people hear the word surrender for the first time, they might think of an army giving up, right? But creating a relationship with surrender and with letting go, I found is one of the core components of the healing journey. Surrender means to allow for whatever arises, which has as a necessary component letting go of expectations. The very nature of letting go of expectations, of allowing for whatever arises, whether good or bad, and then discarding this label, the judgment of good or bad, is known to increase levels of happiness and joy in people's lives, right? Because there's this saying that I like to share. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Suffering comes from the expectation that something should be different. Now, what I've discovered is that in guiding entrepreneurs through this journey by leveraging their beneficial traits, by having an understanding and working within the confines of some of the challenges after the psychedelic work, that they go home and feel the inertia, by including ongoing coaching and integration, there is a tremendous opportunity that coincides with the mission that every single entrepreneur has. And that opportunity is that of inspiring teams. I'd like to share this idea of the inside out, that what is inside of us, peacefulness, harmony, joy, love, gets projected outwards into the world in what we create materially and the relationships that we can create, right? Conversely, if we're experiencing chaos inside, anger, frustration, anxiety, stress, this also gets projected out. David Hawkins shares this concept that the more that we escalate up the ladder of consciousness from the lower energies of shame, guilt, grief, anger, and pride to the higher energies of courage, of willingness, of love, peace, and joy, we begin to replace perception with vision. I'm sure that you've experienced moments where you've been deeply afraid or deeply angry. And the lens by which you can look through life is colored by that lower energy. Meanwhile, I'm sure you can remember times where you felt deeply in love, deeply safe, deeply joyful. And it seems like the world is brighter. The world is on your side. This inside out concept percolates through an entire organizational structure because as the leaders at the top of an organization, we have the opportunity to translate our inner world into cultural values, into values that we instill into the companies themselves. We have the opportunity to be vulnerable with our teams. And as leaders, by sharing our own vulnerability, it gives permission for our teams to be human themselves. That vulnerability then also percolates down the hierarchy of the company itself, such that people are able to engage with greater truthfulness, greater connectivity, and greater inspiration with each other. Once again, if you accept that life is aimed towards safety, the very nature of allowing for vulnerability by being vulnerable ourselves gives teams and organizations the foundational feeling of safety that allows them to then share safety outwards with others. And finally, one of the inspirational things that we can do for our teams is to be a template for what is possible. I shared earlier in this talk that going from having to doing to being is reflective of our journey into getting the feeling that we're seeking, right? When we buy a car, what we're really seeking, or when we buy a house, what we're really seeking is the feeling of safety, of being home, of nesting, right? Again, if life is seeking the feeling of safety, if love is equal to safety plus joy, then by being the template for what is possible and finding greater safety in ourselves, greater self-love, greater joyfulness, we're able to support others in their healing journeys and in their journey towards living a life of inspiration. Many entrepreneurs have walked through these doors. I'm sitting in our beautiful retreat center in Denver, Colorado right now. And entrepreneurs, they come for a variety of reasons, but I would say the top reason is performance enhancement, is because they believe that working with psychedelic assisted therapy can help them be a better leader, be a better entrepreneur. Now, this is absolutely true, but the mechanism by which this happens is actually through their individual and healing and inner journey. And so it's interesting to share with those that have the intention of performance enhancement that their performance is enhanced through healing, because sometimes it could evoke some of the paradigms that I shared that were challenges for entrepreneurs, being strong versus being weak, pridefulness and ego, the propensity to ask where my time is going. But after the retreats that we hold, I shouldn't even say most, all of the entrepreneurs that I've worked with go home with a deeper understanding of this inside out concept, that what is healed, what is worked with, what is elevated inside projects out outside, and goes home with an excitement to deliver this message through the embodiment of their greater calm, clarity, and courage. Psychedelics is just a tool. Now, there are many tools out there: meditation, breath work, somatic work, etc. What we facilitate here in Ceremonia is a synthesis of many of the tools that I found that's worked for myself and for other entrepreneurs. Just like to take a moment to share this organization. Ceremonia is a nonprofit psychedelic church based in Colorado, where we work with plant medicines as sacraments. So much like the Catholic Church would serve wine, we serve entheogens. We facilitate a synthesis of psychology and spirituality, bringing in licensed and trained psychedelic-assisted therapists, combining it with tools and frameworks from psychology, from somatic work, from spirituality, that then give people not only this felt sense of greater healing, but also the tool belt, if you will, that they can bring home and work with their triggers, work with their visioning, work with their manifesting. Our next journey is coming up, and really excited to share this with you. We'll send an email soon. And we'll have some incredible entrepreneurs come through the door once again. I'd just like to finally close by saying how grateful and honored I am to share this message, to have participated and been a part of the healing journey of so many thought leaders and business leaders, and just really excited to continue working with more and more of this very empowered demographic of people. Thank you so much. I'm going to take some questions now. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. Well, this has been a wonderful talk. I'm really grateful for everyone watching. And I'll see you next week for our next talk, which is Psychedelics for Creators, where we'll be exploring the idea of inspiration.